Welcome to the second part where we're going to talk about child abuse and understanding child maltreatment in the context of COVID-19. So, most countries all over the world by now have adopted public health measures to reduce the risk of contagion and to protect people from the spread of COVID-19. For the Caribbean, many of these measures include stay-at-home orders that we all have to adhere to, and the closure of entertainment and relaxation places like bars and beaches and restaurants. And while these measures are absolutely necessary to stop the spread of COVID-19, this quarantine period essentially can increase the number of family violence cases that we see popping up. Evidence all over the world has shown that domestic violence cases are increasing due to the confinement that tends to reinforce abusive behavior or give it a place to flourish where other people can't see. Isolated, anxious, and stressed, often from loss of jobs or loss of wages, potential abusers find themselves without an outlet. And because of this, they may end up becoming more aggressive, searching for a means of power and control. And because of the lockdown, leaving the house and seeking help, like most people may have been able to do before, that's now become a luxury for potential victims of this family violence. So, the World Health Organization defines child abuse and child maltreatment as all forms of physical and/or emotional ill treatment, sexual abuse, neglect or negligent treatment, or commercial or other exploitation, resulting in actual or potential harm to the child's health, survival, development, or dignity in the context of a relationship of responsibility, trust, or power. Whew, that was a long run-on sentence. But key things to remember there, to take out of that long definition. It's some form of mistreatment that can put the child in actual or potential harm for damage to their health, their survival, or their development or dignity. And it tends to happen in the context of some form of relationship of responsibility, trust, or power. Usually it's that the person doing the abusive behavior is someone that the child trusts, or someone who has responsibility over the child or their care, or someone who has some amount of power over the child. And a key thing to note here as well, child abuse and maltreatment are technically not the same term. Maltreatment is more of an umbrella term that includes things like abuse and exploitation and neglect. So, the four main types of child abuse: physical, emotional, sexual, and neglect. Physical abuse would be defined as intentional use of force against the child that results in, or has a high likelihood of resulting in, harm for the child's health, survival, development, or dignity. This could include things like hitting the child, beating them, slapping them, kicking them, shaking the child, biting them, burning them with a cigarette, poisoning them, or even suffocating them, right? And leading out of that, I want to ask another question. Do you believe that if you spare the rod, you'll spoil the child? And if anyone feels comfortable enough, please do leave your response to this question in the comments, because I'm very curious. A lot of us have grown up thinking that this statement is true, that the way to teach a child how to behave right is to teach them through licks, right? A lot of us grew up accustomed to that. When you do something bad, you'll get your tail cut. It's normal. But just because something is what we are accustomed to, just because something is considered quote-unquote normal, does that make it right? Does that make it okay? Is that something we should just carry on into the next generations? Or is that one of the things that we have to learn with incoming generations, learn to get rid of in our culture? And following that one as well, wow, I love rhetorical questions, huh? Is there a difference between discipline and punishment? This one could be a little more tricky because For a lot of people, they're one and the same. You punish your child to discipline them, huh? Not necessarily the case. Discipline is more akin to wanting to teach, and punishment is in wanting to inflict harm. The intent of punishment is to inflict pain for some form of offense. The intent of discipline, on the other hand, is to train the child and to bring about order in their behavior. By punishing our children, we inflict pain, physical or emotional, without much of a greater goal to it. By disciplining the child instead, the greater goal is to teach them about their behavior. So when you punish a child, it tends to be out of anger or frustration. When a child does something wrong, they smash a glass, or they scream at you, or they curse. It causes you to get angry, and that's a natural response. But then when you decide you're going to take out the belt and cut the tail to teach them a lesson, that's more, you might not say this when you're doing it, but that's essentially you saying, I'm going to make you pay for your mistakes. I didn't like the behavior you just exhibit, so I'm going to teach you that is bad by inflicting pain on you for you to learn. How does the child learn from that? As opposed to discipline, where the point is, I want to show you that this behavior is inappropriate. I want to show you why it's inappropriate, and I also want to show you how to behave in a better way. Punishment is just pointing out, I don't like this thing and I'm going to inflict pain for you to understand that I didn't like this. But discipline is, I want you to do better. I want you to learn, and I want you to show me that you're capable of doing better. When it comes to correcting your child's misbehavior, there's a huge difference between punishment and discipline. Punishment will focus on making the child suffer for breaking the rules. Discipline teaches them how to make a better choice next time, especially if you're not there to tell them they made a mistake. Right, so here we have a scenario, and if you can, I would actually like to hear your opinion on this scenario down in the comments. 16-year-old Peter gets into a heated argument with his parents over him coming home late at night. He shouts that they're being unfair when his mother tells him he's no longer allowed to go out with his friends. His father yells, "You don't talk to your mother like that. And you do as we say if you live under our roof." Peter rolls his eyes and curses his father before turning to storm off. In a moment of anger, his father grabs him by the shirt and shoves him as hard as he can against a bookshelf. Peter sustains a fairly deep cut at the back of his head. Is this abuse or an accident? Please let me know your opinion on this in the comments if you can. But note here that he reacted in a moment of anger. So you can say at the end of this that, okay, maybe he didn't mean to hurt Peter. It's not like he grabbed him with the intent of putting a gash to the back of his head, right? He just reacted out of anger because the child did something wrong. The child was very disrespectful. However, does intent really matter in the end when you think about the outcome? Say the police were called into the situation and they just see the child has a gash on the back of his head and they hear that the father got physical with the child. Would the intent really matter in that circumstance? Are the police going to think, oh, he grabbed him and he pushed him, but he didn't mean to hurt him like that. It's not a big deal. No, the intent really doesn't matter then. Yes, for the most part, the father did not think, oh, I'm going to hurt my son now. He just got angry and he succumbed to his emotions. It's a human thing to do, but it's also a very dangerous thing to do, especially when you're dealing with your children. Say this scenario happened at the top of a staircase and the child fell down the flight of stairs and broke his neck. It sounds extreme, but it happens sometimes. Your attempt at punishment in a fit of rage could escalate beyond what you expected. And then how do you explain that your moment of anger permanently damaged or maybe even took a child's life? So intent doesn't matter. You need to control the emotion. You need to not respond in this situation when you're in such a deep place of rage. Perhaps the father could have dealt with the situation after he calmed down. If you realize you're getting so angry, it's probably not the best idea to try and physically fix the situation. What could possibly come from shaking up the child or pushing him against the bookshelf, even if you didn't hit him at the back of the head? So keep that in mind. The emotions can sometimes make your intent meaningless if you lose control of your actions. So emotional abuse. This happens when adults or caregivers taking care of a child judge, threaten, put down, or reject the child. Maybe they even withhold love so the child feels bad about themselves or they feel worthless. Verbal or symbolic acts by the child's parent or the guardian that result in or have quite the chance of resulting in any kind of psychological harm to the child would be considered emotional abuse. And often this will result in abnormal or disrupted attachment development, a tendency for victims to blame themselves for their abuse, future or current, learned helplessness, and overly passive behavior. And when we're talking about attachment, a child's attachment to his or her parents or guardians shapes how you relate to the world, how they'll learn, and what kind of relationships they'll form. If the attachment is disrupted in some way, the child might not develop the secure base they need to form and support relationships as they grow older. Remember, we children learn from us as adults how to communicate with other people. They learn from us what is okay, how people are allowed to treat you. What should I be upset about? What should I just allow to happen? And learned helplessness is a state in which a person or a child has experienced so much of a certain situation or so much of a negative outcome that they eventually become to believe that they're unable to control or change what's happening around them. If someone is bad-mouthing you all the time or calling you awful names or degrading you or humiliating you constantly for years, it is possible that you would reach the point that you think, there's nothing I could do about it, right? What's the point in trying? I'm not worth anything. Nobody loves me anyways. Why should I even bother to get out of this situation? And at such a young age where the child is somewhat helpless to an extent, instilling that in a child is dangerous because it will follow them into adulthood, more likely than not. So I also want to say, be careful what you say to children. Similar to the last example, while intent is good, it does not really prevent certain things from happening. Most parents may not think, oh, I want to hurt this child. I want to damage them psychologically and ruin their future as an adult. No, most parents may not be thinking that. Sometimes we carelessly say things. Maybe if you're upset or you're frustrated, you carelessly just say things without thinking how it will come across to the child. A good example is telling a child, oh, you're not depressed, you're just lazy. A parent who says that might not have the intent of crushing the child's feelings or invalidating everything they think. They might just be frustrated. They may genuinely think maybe the child is faking it or they're being lazy, but as a dangerous thought to put into a child's head, because it will damage their own sense of perception. It will damage their self-perception. It will make a child think, okay, so I might be feeling down, I might be thinking about suicide, or what would happen if I'm not here anymore, if everybody would even miss me. But no, I can't say anything about that because they'll just tell me I'm lazy and I'm seeking attention from other people. You don't want to instill the mindset in a child that whatever they think or feel is meaningless and that they should just deal with it and move on. That child will never trust you or come to you when they need help. And you don't ever want to be that parent that the child does not trust or doesn't want to talk to about what's going on in their head. Now, sexual abuse. This is sexual contact or sexual acts or non-contact sexual activities, like talking about sexual things or sharing pictures or naked photos between an adult and someone younger than 18, an older child and a much younger child, or one person who has power over another, regardless of their age. Some of the effects of this would include the guilt and self-blame again, the vivid flashbacks of the abuse, the nightmares, maybe even inability to sleep, fear of things associated with the abuse. So they may start to generalize their fear onto objects or smells that they associate with the memory of that traumatic experience. Something like maybe even a blanket or certain perfume fragrance can instill a deep sense of fear they may or may not recognize. Difficulties with self-esteem, sexual dysfunction, whether that's hypersexual behavior or an irrational fear of sexual activity, chronic pain, maybe even pain in places that does not seem normal, self-injury or self-harm, suicidal ideation or thoughts about wanting to kill yourself or what would happen if you weren't there anymore, depression, anxiety, and a whole host of other mental illnesses as well. So now we have another scenario. Again, please let me know your own opinions on this and what you would do in these situations. Violet, age 11, is having a hard time walking. When she sits down, she acts like it hurts. You ask her what's wrong. She just looks down and says nothing. A few days later, she's playing football with the other children. She rolls up her pant legs and stretches on the ground when she gets warm. You notice a dark purple bruise on her inner thigh. She seems to remember the bruises are there and rolls the pant leg back down below her knees. Is this sexual abuse, and what should you do? So, Violet might have been the victim of sexual abuse. It's very possible. Pain or difficulty walking or sitting is a big warning sign of this type of abuse. However, don't question the child further, though you might be tempted to find out more information about what's happening. Sexual abuse is a very sensitive topic, and it's best left to a trained counselor or investigators to find out what's happening. If you ask the child about it, like, oh, who did this to you? Or does it hurt? Or did somebody touch you? You may freak the child out. And what if they panic and they go and they warn the abuser about what's happening? That might put the child in much greater danger for having inadvertently shown someone the bruises. And worse yet, it may also give the abuser time to cover their tracks. Simply document what you've seen and report your suspicions right away. And we will soon get into how the reporting process works and what you should do. Now we're going on to neglect. When an adult doesn't do what is needed to take care of a child. This means not giving the child enough food, housing, clothing, medicine, supervision, as simple as just not keeping an eye on the child, not being around with the child, leaving the child at home. You're not giving them enough attention, called emotional neglect, or when the child is ignored, as well as not providing education or schooling or educational resources for the child. So, different neglectful acts can be divided into 6 different categories. First one is supervisory neglect, like I said before, the absence of the parent or the guardian. So basically, you're not there. You leave a child at home alone, which is illegal. And this can lead to physical harm, sexual abuse, or criminal behavior, whether that's criminal behavior from someone else or from the child. Leaving the child alone at home, saying you leave them at home and they get hungry, but you didn't leave any food for them, and they decide, oh, they're going to make lunch for themselves. They turn on the stove and leave the gas on. And what if you come back home and that child burned down the house? You place the child in a situation where, as a natural human would do, if you're hungry, you're going to find a way to get access to food, right? But you basically put the child in harm's way. Physical neglect. The failure to provide the basic physical necessities like a safe and clean home, or access to some form of hygiene. Medical neglect, the lack of providing medical care, or you're not giving the child medicine or taking the child to a doctor when he or she needs to be. Emotional neglect, a lack of nurturance, encouragement, and support. which again might not be as easy to see as other forms of neglect, because it's sometimes hard to know what's going on in the child's head without the child indicating it in some way. Educational neglect, where the caregivers do not provide an education and additional resources in order for the child to actively participate in the school system. And finally, the sixth category is abandonment, when the parent or the guardian simply leaves the child alone for an extended period of time without a babysitter or a caretaker. So, final scenario for this video. Alicia, 6 years old, has had a severe cough for at least 2 weeks. It's gotten so bad that her whole body seems to seize up when she coughs. She wheezes and seems exhausted. You're very concerned about her health and have expressed your concerns to her mother. But her mom just keeps saying, oh, it's going to get better. The doctor would just tell me it's a cold and there's nothing he could do. It's a waste of time. What form of neglect is this? Okay, very quick, easy. It's medical neglect, right? So the mother, for whatever reason, is refusing to take the child to the doctor. Well, I shouldn't say whatever reason. She believes it's pointless to take the child to the doctor. However, unless the mother is a doctor herself, she can't possibly know if it's pointless to take the child to the doctor, because clearly it is not a regular cold, or it does not seem to be. If it is, it seems to be getting worse. A bad cough where her body seems to seize up. So the mother refusing to do this is a form of medical neglect, because we don't know if it's possible that the child has just allergies or something. Maybe it really is just a bad cold, or what if it's as serious as pneumonia? And even if it isn't, it can escalate into that if the child does not get any medical care. Right, so now we're going into the last part of this video. So remember, I said maltreatment is an umbrella term that does not necessarily only include forms of abuse. It also includes things like exploitation, child labor, child trafficking. So child labor is the employment of children in any kind of work that would deprive them of key aspects of their childhood, or interfere with their ability to attend school, or harm them in some way mentally, physically, socially, even morally. And yes, there is a difference between child labor and child work. A child helping out in the family business is not child labor, unless, of course, in order to help out in the family business, the child is missing out on school, the child is not eating properly, is not getting enough sleep, is not getting time to socialize and play. Then that is child labor. It is perfectly healthy for a child to have chores and tasks to be made to help out at home, once it does not deprive them of their basic needs and their rights. Because the fact is, children who are engaged in child labor, most of them don't go to school. They don't receive any kind of proper nutrition or even medical care. They have almost no time to play like regular children because they have to work like adults do. More than half of them are exposed to some of the most dangerous forms of child labor: prostitution, drug trafficking, armed conflict, or other hazardous environments. If any kind of job or task a child is given takes away from their essential rights, it is child labor. Household chores in reasonable conditions and under supervision is completely fine, and it's an integral part of family life, and growing up it teaches children responsibility, right? However, if this workload starts to interfere with the child's education or is excessive, it can be considered child labor. And then we also have child trafficking, the recruitment, transportation, transfer, or harboring and receipt of children for the purpose of exploitation, or all of these forms of child labor that we talk about there. Right, so this is a little chart. Don't worry too much about having to read each one, but it's basically little pictures of different forms of abuse, some of which may not be very, very obvious at first, but some of which are. Things like exposing a child to pornography. That is a form of child abuse. That's a form of sexual abuse, in fact. But maybe teasing a child might not seem to be abuse. That seems a little excessive to call that abuse. However, if the teasing is so intense and so excessive that the child begins to feel worthless or they feel humiliated constantly, that is abuse. You're harming the child psychologically. Things like hitting or hurting the child to relieve your own frustration, that is abuse. Manipulating the child, not listening to them, neglecting their emotional needs, all of these are forms of abuse, some of which may not be as obvious to us as others. So this will be the last part of this second video, and next we're going to talk about factors that contribute to child maltreatment and ways that we can reduce or prevent it.